Molly Peters was an actress who didn't have all that big of a career in the industry. However, she did end up making history during her short career by becoming the first ever actress in a James Bond film to be seen taking off her clothes on camera. Although no legitimate nudity can be found in her performance in 1965's Thunderball, this didn't stop censors at the time from nearly having a heart attack when her character was shown suggestively stripping her clothes off for Sean Connery's James Bond. Join Factsverse as we explore how Molly Peters was the first nude Bond girl. Molly Peters' role in Thunderball was too hot for theaters. Of the few roles that actress Molly Peters took on during her relatively short career, her role in the James Bond film Thunderball undeniably remains her most iconic. She appeared as nurse Patricia Fearing, who is tasked with taking care of James Bond. Bond ends up being the one to take care of Patricia as he turns the tables on the nurse and seduces her into giving him her love. Molly certainly didn't have all that big of a role in the film, which was the fourth in the main James Bond franchise and was released after the classic Goldfinger. But it made waves because of the fact that her character took her clothes off for Sean Connery's James Bond. Goldfinger was the third film to star Connery, and everyone involved in the production of the follow-up, Thunderball, knew they'd have a heck of a time outdoing the feature. Goldfinger had been a massive hit with both critics and audiences, and it still stands today in the eyes of many as the greatest James Bond film ever. Given the producers knew they would have a challenging time keeping audiences involved, they had to think of some ways to make the fourth James Bond feature, Thunderball, stand out. One of the things they decided to amp up was the sex appeal. Thunderball featured a handful of beautiful Bond girls, and one of them was Patricia Fearing, played by Molly Peters. Thunderball nearly received an X rating. The producers had certainly intended for Molly Peters' nearly nude scenes to make a stir, but they likely didn't anticipate the controversy that would come about from the actress stripping her clothes off on camera. Even though no explicit nudity was shown in the film, censors at the time couldn't believe what they were seeing when Patricia Fearing began stripping in the film for James Bond. At the end of the day, not much could be seen of Molly Peters, despite the fact that the audience knew her character was naked. But this didn't stop censors from nearly giving Thunderball an X rating. It seems the censors at the British Board of Film Classification required the scene featuring Molly to be significantly trimmed in order for the film to pass with an appropriate classification. Of course, the film would have likely proved a box office disaster if it had been given an adults-only classification. The Bond franchise has always been about money, and there's no reason for a Bond girl to be showing off skin unless it sells tickets. It's unclear just how racy the footage that had to be excised was, but it's doubtful the producers would have submitted any cut of Thunderball to the British Board of Film Classification that had any amount of explicit nudity. Even though Molly was only in Thunderball for a brief amount of time, audiences fell in love with her character. It didn't hurt that the character was naked for much of her screen time, even if the audience wasn't allowed the chance to see the good parts. Sadly, her career, following the release of Thunderball, left a bit to be desired. Before we tell you more about that, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to Factsverse if you haven't already. How Molly wound up in Thunderball. Molly Peters was born in England in the 1940s. Before she started her acting career, she could be seen posing as a model in sexy publications like Playboy and Modern Man. It seems Molly never had much of an issue with taking her clothes off, and she arguably would have been fine with showing a good deal more on screen in Thunderball. It was undeniably Molly's various sexy photo shoots that brought her to the attention of the producers of the James Bond films, who felt the actress would provide the perfect ingredient to keep audiences enthralled after the franchise peak that was Goldfinger. Molly appeared in the film when she was in her early 20s and had been discovered by the film's director, Terrence Young. Thunderball was based on the Ian Fleming novel of the same name. But the fourth James Bond feature isn't the only adaptation of Fleming's Thunderball that's been made. Nearly 2 decades after the release of the original film, a new film was made that attempted to adapt the classic spy novel for more modern audiences. This film was 1983's Never Say Never Again, which was directed by Empire Strikes Back's Irvin Kershner. Never Say Never Again is an odd film in the James Bond canon, as it's not considered part of the main film franchise due to not being produced by the same people. Instead, it's essentially an outlier in the world of James Bond films, though it featured Sean Connery as Bond. Kim Basinger recreated Molly Peters' infamous scene. Never Say Never Again is notable for many reasons, including the fact that it allowed aging Sean Connery to step back into the role of James Bond one more time before he became too old for audiences to buy him as the character. At that point, Roger Moore was portraying the character. The same year Connery could be seen playing Bond again, Moore could be seen playing him in the regrettably named Octopussy. Both films performed well at the box office, but Octopussy took in around $20 million more than its immediate competition. Still, Never Say Never Again stands as the much more interesting James Bond film nowadays, partially because it features Sean Connery's final performance as Bond, and partially because it was produced outside of the main film franchise, and features some decidedly different production values. There are some who say the movie is the only Bond film to feature a distinct directorial vision, as it's always been the producers who have truthfully been in charge of the main film franchise. The film featured a burgeoning Kim Basinger recreating the controversial stripping scene Molly Peters had performed in Thunderball. By 1983, however, there was nothing remotely controversial about it. Following Thunderball, Molly Peters only appeared in a handful of movies and TV series before retiring. It's been suggested the actress retired from her career after falling out with her agent. Claudine Auger also made history in Thunderball. Molly Peters passed away in 2017 at age 75. Roger Moore passed away the same year. In 2020, Sean Connery passed away. While Peters remains inarguably best known for her performance as Patricia Fearing, she wasn't even the most prominent Bond girl featured in the film. The main Bond girl was Claudine Auger's Domino. Claudine made history by being the first French Bond girl. Given that she had an incredibly heavy French accent, her lines had to be dubbed, but Claudine was a great swimmer and one of the few stars in the film who didn't require a stunt double for her numerous underwater scenes. Of course, Thunderball has been criticized for its surplus of aquatic action scenes, with a great deal of the film's action taking place underwater. Claudine performed a great deal after her appearance in Thunderball, but she found much more success in her home country than anywhere else. Because of this, Thunderball is arguably still her most iconic film. She passed away in 2019. Other beautiful actresses who played Bond girls in Thunderball include the Italian Luciana Paluzzi, as well as English-Jamaican actress Martine Baswick. Now it's time to hear from you. Did you know the James Bond feature Thunderball nearly got an X rating? Let us know in the comments section below. And before you go, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to Facts First if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content. By the way, if you haven't joined Facts First as a member yet, be sure to look below this video and click the join button. By becoming a paid member of Facts First, you'll get access to exclusive video content that you won't find anywhere else. This includes some of our more mature content that isn't suitable for public audiences, which includes topics like Hollywood actresses who posed for Playboy and some of the steamiest moments in movie history. Plus, you can enjoy these videos completely ad-free. Our biggest fans will notice they also get badges next to their name when they leave comments on our videos. We pay special attention to comments from our members, and so do other viewers. So if you want exclusive content from Facts First or inside access to discussions with other community members, click the join button to get started for just $4.99.